Hey there, happy artists, and welcome back to Kyle Heath Art. I hope you guys are all doing great, and I'm so excited to be back doing another video with you. This video is going to be a paint-along video where I'm going to talk through my process of painting some grapefruit slices. I'm really excited to do another process video because my process has changed quite a lot in the past 6 months or so. I've been experimenting a lot with the free time that I have had, and I finally feel like I'm coming together with a painting style that is truly my own and has a lot of visual impact and energy to it. So I'm kind of still in the beginning steps of figuring out what I want my style to be going forward, but I think that I'm going to have a lot to share with you about how to come up with a style that's yours and what techniques I'm specifically using to create a painting that in my mind has a lot of energy and impact to it. So this is going to be a real fun one. To be honest with you, I have not had much time for painting in the past 3 months. I've got a baby girl in the house who is now a little older than 3 months, so that's been very exciting. Mom and Dad are having a blast being parents, trying to figure everything out. But one thing that we have noticed is that your free time goes down the drain as soon as you have a newborn in the house. And maybe that'll be the case going forward with as she ages. Maybe we'll never have free time again. Who knows? I've certainly learned to be more efficient with my time. But figuring out a pattern of regular painting is something that's still eluded me. I know that I'll get there though. I'm confident in it. And honestly, I have loved the time away from art. I think it's given me a perspective on my own life, but also a perspective on my art practice. It's amazing what stepping away can do. You know, you step away from a painting in order to see the big picture of the painting, and sometimes you need to step away from your normal way of living in order to get a context for the bigger picture of your own life. So with that, let's get into the process as we're seeing it so far. I'm going to jump in with my thoughts about the philosophy of painting, shape language. I'm going to talk about all kinds of things throughout this, but I'll periodically step back into this painting to talk about the process that's going on and trying to help you see what I'm thinking about as I paint. So if you're familiar with my paintings, you'll know that it is pretty normal for me to do a colored background. So nothing too new there. I use acrylic paint, and this is a 12 by 12 canvas panel. And the reason why I do that is twofold. Number one, any of the spots that I intentionally don't cover up are going to have this fun, like vibrant purple pop to them at the end of the painting. And secondly, I like to have a color on the canvas because it makes it easier for me to judge the relative value of the colors that I place down. So what I mean by that is when you're putting a color down on bright white canvas, it's very difficult to judge just how light or dark the paint is that you put down. So when I put down a color on the canvas that's more mid-tone for the entire background, so I've got this purple mid-tone now for the whole background, it's just easier for you to see what color is actually light, what color is actually dark. And that helps you when you're trying to create a realistic sense of light and dark in your painting, which is, in my mind, the most critical thing you can do to make a painting look realistic, is to have accurate lights and darks. I get closer to getting it right the first time when I have a mid-tone color on the canvas. So that's a big reason why I do it there. So I'm using, it looks like a yellow ochre for the drawing stage of this painting. There's a variety of different colors I could have chosen to use, but the reason why I like the yellow ochre is, number one, it's kind of a bit towards a light color. Yellow is a very high value color, so it stands out nicely against a mid-tone background. And secondly, I feel like yellow ochre can be covered up pretty well. There are some paint colors that have such a high level of tinting strength that when you throw another paint over it, it kind of blends and you still see the color. So for example, if I'd used a variety of different reds, or if I'd used like a phthalo blue or something as my drawing, then anytime I painted over that, you just get this black, this mush that appears. And so using yellow ochre makes it easier for me to hide the drawing lines. I'm twiddling my thumb over here. I must be thinking about what to do next. That's so funny. So my drawing is pretty much done, but I still want to talk about what I did for the drawing. You'll see that I have almost no curved lines in my drawing. I've really emphasized the geometric character of my grapefruit slices. The reason why I did that was very intentional, and you'll see that I'm emphasizing that too on this red that I'm coloring in. You see all that angularity that I put in there. Whenever you put an angle in, it's far more interesting than a curve. In a sense, a curve or a rounded shape is a safe way of viewing your drawing. It's hard to really go wrong with a rounded shape. But whenever you use angularity, you are intentionally expressing that I want this shape to have a sense of movement towards this way, or I want this to specifically look acute or obtuse. In my mind, it's a bit more of a courageous decision to use angularity than it is to use round shapes. Round shapes kind of average out things, and angular shapes really dive in. And so, as part of my new strategy of painting, the new style that I want, I really want to double down on this angularity to really put as much character as I can into the shapes. I personally view shapes as the most important part of painting. So I've invested a lot of energy into trying to think about the shapes that I'm making as I paint. And so the angularity of my drawing is an example of me trying to really be bold when I paint, because boldness results in expression. It creates a style that is not mild, but is truly saying something, whether you like it or not. Because, again, a lot of people may look at the shapes that I'm using and think that they aren't as aesthetically pleasing as they would like. Some people may look at a shape and feel like they would rather it be shaped a different way, maybe a little less sharp, maybe a little more friendly. And so I feel just like I'm going out on a limb by using the shapes that I do. And it's possible that over time my shapes will change, but I really do feel like this sense of angularity is one of the keys to getting energy in your painting. Now, I'm not saying that all of your paintings need to look as angular as mine do, of course. But if you're looking for energy, it may be beneficial to you to channel a little bit of that angularity. Have a side that is very specifically obtuse and a side that's very specifically acute. And at that point, there is a direction going on in the viewer's eye. You can use that to influence a sense of movement in your painting, to point towards focal points, all kinds of things. So now I'm coming in with a super vibrant orangish tone, and what I'm painting right here is the areas of subsurface scattering on these grapefruits. So let me explain what subsurface scattering is. Have you ever held your hand up in front of a light and seen how your hand kind of glows red a little bit? That is subsurface scattering, and it happens with citrus fruits too. What's happening there is, so when you hold your hand up against a light, your hand isn't totally solid. Light can actually shine through parts of your hand because so much of your hand is water and muscle. So when light shines through inside your hand, it starts to bounce around and it creates this glow effect. And that's what you see on these grapefruits. I'll try to include a reference photo for this, and you can kind of see a bit of the glow. But that's what I'm going for here with these really vivid oranges, is that subsurface scattering. What happens to the color in those parts is it gets more saturated, so the color is more vivid, and it gets a bit brighter. So the best way to convey a subsurface scattering is to beef up the saturation of your color. And of course, to do that, there has to be other parts of the painting that aren't super saturated. That way you can have enough saturation left in your quiver to create that effect. So that's what I'm doing there. You'll see that I'm going very paint by number with my painting, and that's very intentional too. By the end of this painting, I want there to still be a sense of a lot of shapes of color. So I'm intentionally not going to soften too many edges. I'm going to leave it hard for the most part, and where I do have softer edges, I want those edges to look soft, not so much because I've blended between two shapes of color, but because two shapes of color right next to each other are pretty close in value or color. So there's all kinds of different ways that you can soften your edges. We think of softening edges just as something you do with your brush, just softening it out, rubbing your brush over to make it a slower transition. But if you've got two very similar shades of color right next to each other, painted down hardly without any blending, that is also a soft edge. So there's different ways that you can go about creating softness, and it creates a totally different visual effect. So now you'll see that I'm coming in and painting an additional part of the grapefruit. Now, in my mind, this grapefruit slice in the very front is the focal point. So we'll see how successfully I convey that at the end of the painting. But seeing this as my focal point, here's what I should be thinking about as I paint. I want this grapefruit slice to have the greatest contrast out of the slices. So the lightest lights and the darkest darks should appear on this. Also on that front grapefruit slice, ideally I will have the most detail. So if I do that correctly, I'll have more smaller shapes on the front of the grapefruit if I really want to emphasize that. So keep that in mind as I paint, and you can judge whether I've done that or not, or whether if I've treated every single grapefruit slice the same, it might be difficult for you to find a focal point in the painting. So that's a way to put your inner critic hat on and critique my painting. It's very helpful to critique another person's work because it helps you to think about the fundamentals of painting. Any chance you have to exercise those muscles of did this artist do this successfully? How could this artist do it better? Anytime you're asking that question, you're helping yourself out in your own paintings to think with that same lens. And note, this is different than being critical. Looking at a painting and judging it based on a certain technique doesn't have to have a sense of judgment to it. If you're doing it to your own painting, you don't need to feel like you failed if you haven't successfully employed a certain technique that you wanted to. You don't have to think that you're not as good of an artist as you want to be. This critique can happen without any kind of judgment of your personal identity. The goal here is to judge the skill based on your intentions when you went into the painting. And the more that you can divorce your sense of personal identity from that critique, the quicker you'll be able to progress. Because getting better at art is all about seeing where you want to go and seeing when you have and haven't gotten there. So there does need to be a lot of communication of I haven't gotten there without feeling like I'm a failure because I haven't gotten there. I hope you can see the distinction there. So I'm still going along and filling in the shapes of color and trying to really keep that angularity without over blending. It looks like on this top grapefruit slice, it's almost one full color, and that's great. I love seeing that. I hope that I don't go in and change that too much because it's nice to see less detail on that grapefruit slice. Because guess what? That's not the focal point. Because it's not the focal point, I don't need to put a lot of detail into it in order for people to get the idea that it's another grapefruit slice among many. So what I'm doing then is allowing your peripheral awareness to notice that grapefruit slice and say, yeah, it's another grapefruit slice. I've conveyed that. But now, hopefully, I'll be not putting in any more detail into that, and instead putting detail on the very front grapefruit slice where I want your attention to be drawn. So we'll see if I do that or not. Hopefully I do. Now here I'm coming in with a much, much lighter color. So this looks like it's the kind of pulpy white part of the slice. And this to me looks like it's about as light as you could possibly get. I don't know if I would be able to get much lighter than that. So hopefully I'm not using too much of that white on the areas that are in the shadow. It would be good for me to reserve this value of white just for the areas of the lightest white so that the viewer can distinguish between the part of the grapefruit that's in the light and the part of the grapefruit that's in the shadow. It's very important to keep your lightest lights and your darkest darks in your back pocket for the areas that need them most. It's way, way too easy for us as painters to just go in with that super light color in a shadow area. So when you're painting, it's very critical for you to be aware of what area of your subject is in the light and what area is in the shadow. you never want to use a highlight in a shadow area, and you never want to use a shadow value in an area that's in the light. Keep your lights and your shadows separate from each other, and your painting will look much more powerful. So as I'm going in with these shapes, and you'll see I'm still kind of creating a shape and then filling it in. So I'm still seeing shapes. I want to talk a little bit about my color mixing. You can kind of see my palette there on the left. I know you can't see too much of it, but I think you see enough for me to explain a little bit of my technique now. I've recently changed the way that I mix color. Traditionally, I used to use only 3 colors, yellow, blue, and red, and then white, of course. And I would mix every single color out of that. And generally, I would pre-mix before I started painting. That is a great way to paint, and there's certainly nothing wrong with it. I recommend that way of painting to anybody. But I'm doing something a little bit different now. You'll see on my palette that I actually have black on the palette now. And I'm also using 2 different yellows, I see. But the big change to the way I paint is that I have black on my palette now. So you may know that I've been doing a lot of digital art lately. And the way that you pick colors when you paint digitally is just different from the standard paint mixing practice, at least the one that I used to do. When you're painting digitally, you have to choose your hue at the very beginning. So you've got a little slider and you need to decide, like, okay, I'm going for a green. And then from there, you decide, like, what kind of green do I want? Do I want a green that's really saturated or really dull? Do I want a green that's really dark or really light? And so that process is a little bit different than paint mixing, where you may kind of start with trying to think of the saturation that you're going for, or something else. Sorry, I'm not explaining myself too well right now because I hear my baby girl crying in the background. Father problems. Hopefully you don't hear her crying. But yeah, it's so funny as a parent how hearing your child cry just captures your attention. It's so hard to think of anything else, and it's so hard to not feel sad when your little one is expressing that she needs something. But I know she's all right. She's got great care. So, I told you I've got this different paint mixing technique. I'm going to have to make a video all about it because I don't know how well of a job I can do trying to describe it without any visual assistance for you. So, sorry if it doesn't make any sense. But basically, I'm trying to paint the same way I do digitally. I'm trying to pick colors the same way I do digitally, where I decide, okay, I want this area to look a little bit yellow. And then from there, I might mix in black and white in order to get to the saturation and value that I want. Excuse me. So in the very beginning stage, I'm saying, okay, well, I want this yellow to be like a little bit red, so I'll mix a little bit red in there. And then, okay, I've got the hue that I'm going for. So I'm not thinking about value or about saturation at all. And then I use some mixture of black and white to get me to the value and saturation that I'm looking for. Do you see how that's different? I don't think many people paint like that, but I think that there is a lot of power in that once I figure it out. Again, I'll make a whole video about it. Maybe that'll be next month's Patreon, because I think it's a pretty novel way to paint. But let me tell you why I'm painting that way. So when you're painting, one of the tools you have at your disposal for really creating character and vibrancy is the color choices that you make. Now, I've told you that like my goal right now is to really double down on energy and character in my painting. And so one of the ways I want to do that is through my use of color. Now, in my mind, I can very intentionally make a painting that has a really diverse set of hues by choosing my hues at the very beginning. So, if I were doing this painting and I was just looking at the subject, I would create a faithful painting of what I'm seeing. And I would pretty much just use a variety of red tones, orange tones, and yellow tones to get the point across with these grapefruits. But as an artist, what if I decided to really double down on my freedom and ability to express vibrant colors by deciding at the beginning, I want colors in these grapefruits that are some form of green also. I want colors in these grapefruits that are some form of blue. And you might say, well, green and blue aren't in the grapefruit. And you'd be right about that. But because my goal is expressiveness, vibrancy, I can cheat reality by using hues that aren't actually there in the name of diversity and visual interest. So I don't know how much I employed that on this painting. I don't quite see anything here yet that screams any color to me other than yellow, orange, and red. But I want to express this to you because that's my goal in the long term. And so practically speaking, the way that I would do that is I would mix some very neutral versions of those colors that I wanted to add. So I can't put a super bright purple or blue or green on there, or it's gonna look completely wrong. Now, if you wanted to try that, that's fine. But if I want to sneak those colors in and have it still feel like it fits as a whole, then I'll use gray versions of those hues. So blue, purple, green. I would really gray those out. And the reason why, if I grayed those out and then put them on there, that it would work is because those grays are right in the middle of the color wheel, which means they're right next to our reds and yellows and oranges. They don't have to jump the entire color wheel to the opposite side in order to reach the other one. Because they're grays, they're sitting there right next to the reds, yellows, and oranges. And so to our eyes, they look like they fit. Again, that's something I'm going to need to give you some visuals for. It's so hard to talk about these things without any visuals. So I'll save that for a future video, maybe next month when I talk about my my new color mixing process. But I wanted to share that with you just to give you a sneak peek, let you guys be the first people to hear about the new changes that I'm trying out. Because, yeah, I want to keep you guys up to date with the best information, with the discoveries as I'm coming up with them. So now you'll see I'm coming in with some vibrant yellows. And I'll only be using these vibrant yellows in a couple places. Again, I'm carefully using my saturation so that the saturation still stands out. If I had saturated colors everywhere, then nothing's going to stand out. But a little bit of saturation really, really pops. So when I look at the grapefruit slices, the real life ones in front of me, I see this kind of like vibrant yellow color that's hanging out on the edges. And so I'm emphasizing that, especially in the areas that are in the light. And you might see that even more later. I think I'm going to come down in the areas of light with an even brighter and more vibrant version. We'll see if I do that successfully or not. And I'm happy to say that that top grapefruit still does not have a lot of detail. So far I'm doing good, showing restraint there. Good job, Kyle, in the past. You are doing it. All right, so as I go through this, I want to talk a little bit more about the shape language that I'm using. I had mentioned that to you towards the beginning of this, how I'm really doubling down on angular shapes. But there's another thing I'm doing here that I think adds a lot of visual impact to my painting. And that's that I have large shapes in this painting, I have medium shapes, and I have small shapes. So an example of a large shape is going to be the background of this painting, which I'm going to paint an entirely flat color, so it looks like one big shape. Another example of a pretty big shape is that grapefruit slice up at the top. It's all pretty much one shape of color. And then you'll see I've got a bunch of medium shapes kind of inside the grapefruit slices. And then I've got a bunch of tiny shapes at the top of the grapefruit, along the edges you'll see some. And so I have a diversity of shapes in this painting. And what that does is, again, it creates energy and visual interest. It might not seem like a really big deal, but a painting really does look more bland if everything in the painting is the exact same shape. It's a part of composition that you want to use good, interesting contrast anywhere you can in a painting. A good painting is always this mix of contrast and continuity. So what I mean by that is continuity, you see different examples of red all over there. But you also see the contrast of some yellow pops. We've got a lot of really angular shapes, but every once in a while there is a little bit of curve, like at the top middle of the grapefruit slices. So we've got continuity of you seeing kind of the same theme over and over as you look around the painting, but then you've got contrast where you see in certain areas things are obviously different from each other. That is, I think, the core of good art there, is finding a balance between those two things. So for contrast, you'll see that I've got a strong sense of light colors and dark colors. Contrast, you'll see I've got a lot of different sizes of shapes. So I've got small shapes, medium shapes, and large shapes. And all of that contrast just makes a piece interesting. And that's one of the reasons why you want your focal point to have the most contrast, is because that'll make it the most interesting, which means that the viewer's attention is going to immediately be drawn to it. So contrast is not just light and dark like we think about it. Contrast can be the different shape sizes, it can be different levels of saturation, it can be different hues like red versus yellow, it can be all kinds of different things. And I'm happy to say now that I've got a shadow tone that looks a little bit green. So I'm getting a little bit of that green hue in there after all. It's kind of a mix between a dull yellow that's moving towards green a bit, which is exactly what I want. I don't want something that screams green, but I do want like a little bit of a sense of green in my dull colors. So yay for me. That was my goal, to have like some good different hues bouncing around in here. So now you'll see that I'm carving around the grapefruit shapes with this neutral blue tone. Let's see. Yeah, I would call that a neutral blue. Almost gray, to be honest. But you can see there's a little bit of blue going on in there. I'm going around and just cutting around the grapefruits. And you'll see I'm not putting too much care in making sure that the whole thing is covered. Maybe I'll go over it later and cover it a bit more. I don't remember. But my goal at this point is just to carve around the shape. And what I'm hoping is that that helps these grapefruits kind of pop off the canvas. The grapefruits are the stars, and I really want a lot of visual impact. So my goal is for pretty hard edges here. Now, the edges will be softer in the areas of the shadow. And the main reason for that will be that the values are going to be more similar. Red is a pretty dark color. Any form of red is quite dark, which means that red next to shadow, you're not going to see quite as much of a distinction. So just carving around here. And I'm going to take a moment here to kind of talk a little bit more about the fact that I took a break from art. I talked about that a little bit in my previous video, or maybe the one before it. But more so than any point in the past 2 years of my life, 3 years of my life, I have not done hardly any art at all. Historically, I've had a pattern of, even if I wasn't painting, I was still drawing almost every single night in the evenings. That was kind of like my Zen escape kind of thing, was just getting to watch TV and do a bunch of drawing. Since we've had the baby, I haven't been able to do that anymore. Evening time is when I need to watch our kid. My wife is in busy season right now. She's an accountant, so she works quite late. And even if she wasn't in busy season, you know, I'd still feel like I kind of had to pull my weight with helping her out in the evening so that she wasn't the only one watching our baby, so that she had some time to relax after work. So, all that being said, I've lost the time in the evening that I used to devote to drawing, and I haven't yet figured out when and how drawing's going to fit back in. Painting, as a new parent, it's probably a little more clear why it's difficult for me to squeeze time into painting. It's just a little bit more work. You know, you need like 2 hours of undivided time. I think this painting took me 2 hours and 20 minutes. So it is a little bit sped up. But yeah, it's just more work to sit down and paint. Now, I could do it for sure. There's so many people who are new parents who are able to squeeze in painting. But I've chosen at this point for my priorities to be a little different. And I am glad that I did. You know, if I hadn't taken this time away from painting, I don't think I would be able to make the painting that you're seeing today. In a sense, you know, I've been thinking hard about my style for over a year at this point. And I think I needed to be able to step away from thinking about my style, from thinking about painting, in order to get a refreshed perspective and to see my art differently. Do you see how that can happen? It's kind of like when you're working on a painting, you know, maybe you've been slaving at it for days. if you take a break from that painting, even if it's like a 15-minute break, even if you just stand up and take a few steps away and look at your painting from a little further away, all of a sudden you see your painting differently. You see flaws that you didn't notice before. Your eye just catches different things than when you were super duper focused on one thing. And that's really been the story of my time away from art for the past few months. I feel like I've gotten perspective from it, even perspective on what art means to me. But definitely in terms of my style and how to go about getting the style that I want. I'm not saying that you should take a 3-month break from your artwork, but if for some reason you feel like you need to, then go ahead and do it. You're not going to fall behind all of the other artists that maybe you're competing with, or the goals you have in your mind of where you want to be down the road as an artist. You're not going to fall behind. You'll be all right. So never feel bad about taking a break if you need to. There's all kinds of benefits that you can get from it. I've been thinking a lot over the past 3 months or so about the cycle of work and rest. So much of our life is this balance of exerting ourselves to do something and then needing to recharge. The easiest way that we can think of that is in the context of being awake and then needing to go to sleep. Every single day we rely on that cycle in order to keep going. My baby girl hates sleeping. She always wants to be awake. She always wants to be going. She always wants to see what's going on. And she gets so frustrated when we're trying to get her to sleep, or when she knows that she's falling asleep and doesn't want to. And aren't we like that as adults too? We want to be on. We have these goals that we want to accomplish. We have all these things that we want to do, and we're impatient with the idea of resting. We don't want to rest to recharge and have the energy to do something. There's things that we want to do. So oftentimes, even as adults, we neglect our rest because we want to go, we want to do. But eventually, you're going to have to pay the piper. If you're constantly going and don't give yourself the necessary part of the work-rest cycle, the rest, if you don't give yourself that rest, eventually you're going to get burnt out. You might wrestle with anxiety, or at the very least, you're going to be less effective during your work cycle than if you had given yourself rest. It's just like my baby daughter. If she is awake all day without taking any naps, then she's going to be drowsy while she's trying to do the things she wants to do. So many things you learn from having a baby. Man, I see myself in a newborn so much. All of her flaws, I still see myself doing them all. At 36 years old, I'm still doing it. It's amazing. So I thought a lot about that, and I guess maybe what I'd like you to get from this is to not be afraid of rest. Don't be afraid of stopping work. There's always going to be more work that you have to do. There's always going to be more work to do than you have time for. But rest is natural and beautiful and good. You need rest in order to live. And you need rest in order to thrive. So including rest in your cycle will make sure that you can work as quickly, as efficiently as possible. So don't hate it. If you feel too tired to do what you need to do, allow yourself to get that rest. And I guess that goes further into another thing I wanted to talk about today. And that's that it's easy for us as artists to try to foster our art. We try to, we spend a lot of time and energy into trying to express ourselves as best we can, to make as good of art as we can. So we tend to be good at fostering our art, but we're not always as good at fostering our heart. I know that's so corny, but it's the only way I could think of to describe it. Really taking energy to love yourself, to think about what you want, and to do what you can for yourself to keep yourself happy, inspired, joyful. Isn't that what it's really all about in the end? We took up art because we love it. We took up art because it seemed like a valid form of self-expression. So art was about ourselves from the beginning. We did it because it made us happy. We did it because it helped us to communicate something within us to the world or to ourselves. So much of art is about ourselves. But we can forget about that and turn art into a practice that is disconnected from who we are and what we want to be. So there's no shame in thinking about who are you and what do you want to be. So often that voice in our head is, I ought to be this. I need to make myself this. This person thinks I should be this way, or this religious text tells me that I need to think this way. And we develop this habit of never asking ourselves, like, how do I want to feel? Why am I like this? What's the reason why I'm doing this or that? What can I do that will make me feel like I'm more aligned with God, or with what's true, or what feels fulfilling for me in this life? It's too easy to go through your entire life not asking these kinds of questions. But since you're an artist, you are predisposed to be able to ask these kinds of questions. You're more in touch with yourself than the average person because you have a habit of self-expression in some form. So use it. Really think about what makes you happy and try to cultivate happiness. There's nothing wrong with being happy. We have a habit of thinking that it would be selfish for us to think about ourselves or think about our own needs. But if you don't love yourself first, it's impossible for you to truly love anything else. You're going to treat other people in the end exactly the way you treat yourself. So if you're particularly hard on yourself, you're going to end up being hard to the people around you. If you're judgmental towards yourself, you can bet that you are going to be judgmental to the people around you. It's just what happens. So anyways, that's my sermon for the day, I guess. Sorry, I know you weren't here for that, but yeah, I guess that's what you get with Kyle's philosophical art ramblings. Let's talk about the painting a little bit, because a lot's come together since I talked last. You'll see that I have filled in the background entirely with one single color, painted pretty thickly. You can see those brush strokes on the right side especially, big old globs, just the way I like it. And the background was drawn with hard lines around everything except for those cast shadows. You'll see a little bit of softness in the cast shadows, and that's intentional. I want my shadows to soften on the edge so that they don't take as much attention. They look a little bit more like a shadow would. Obviously, I'm not the most realistic painter, but it's important for me to convey like that realistic sense of what a shadow does by blending that cast shadow a little bit. So that was an intentional choice. It was also very intentional to keep my background and my shadows quite flat. In my mind, what that does is it really draws the viewer's attention to the subject. I want people to see the subject. Now, I don't want the subject to look like just a pure cutout in front of a background, and that's definitely a tendency of my style. But I'm hoping that doesn't happen as much because there's a continuity between the brush strokes that I use on the background and the foreground. And there's also a continuity of how one pure color is filled in. So if I really blended those grapefruit slices with all kinds of subtle shifts in color, then it would look more cut out against the background than it does right now. So there I'm aiming for a little bit of continuity in order to achieve my goal of having it stand out from the background but not be a cutout from the background. Hopefully I've achieved that. You can be the judge of it. So now I'm making some of these like zigzaggy shapes on the grapefruit. I'm connecting certain parts of the grapefruit together that aren't really connected. You know, there's like these little triangle cutouts in the slices, and I'm rolling right through them on some of these zigzags and making a red zigzag that basically runs across that whole grapefruit slice, especially the one in the middle. In the future, I would love to play around with that more and see if I couldn't get more of that effect, because that kind of energy in that shape, especially in that middle grapefruit, the brightest red part, I love that shape. And there's something really cool about making a shape that goes the wrong direction in a sense, but still conveys the thing you're looking at. That is pure abstraction at that point. You kind of see the same thing if you ever see someone painting like a stem of a plant or a flower. Sorry, my English wasn't going real well there. If someone's trying to paint a stem, you might think the only way to paint a stem would be to go from up to down with your brush stroke. But try going left to right in a bunch of little lines as you go down, and you get that same kind of abstraction that I'm talking about. The paintbrush doesn't need to go, quote unquote, the right way. And when it goes the wrong way, I think it's actually better. It abstracts it out better. And whenever there's a good abstraction, the viewer just loves it. Something about the viewer's brain just really likes that abstraction. So I am going into more and more smaller shapes of detail on the front grapefruit. And I'm also really using dark colors here. So that's good. That means that I'm thinking about contrast. I want my darkest dark and my lightest light, ideally to be that front grapefruit. And I want the smallest shapes of color to be that front grapefruit. So far, that's looking pretty good. Now that middle grapefruit is so interesting to me, but I still think I'm doing a pretty good job. And you'll see here, I covered up the whole darkest color of that middle grapefruit with a lighter color of red. Good job, Kyle. What that means is that there's a dark color in the front grapefruit that isn't really in that middle grapefruit. So I must have been thinking as I was painting, I need to save my darkest color for the front, which is my focal point. So That's awesome. I do like a lot of the shapes on the front of the grapefruit too. You'll see kind of in the middle of the front one, there's two shapes that kind of like two different C shapes pointed towards each other that kind of swirl around each other a bit, kind of like the Firefox logo or something like that. I like that. That's got a good sense of movement too. It almost looks like there's a circular movement happening in that front grapefruit slice. So that's good. I'm really, really thinking about that. And so far, that middle top grapefruit still doesn't have a lot of detail, which is great. I hope that I keep it like that. Now I'm coming in with some lighter colors. This is a pretty saturated red with a little bit of orangey peachiness to it. So I must be going in and trying to emphasize some subsurface scattering with that color. I must have decided that my red was too red, that it needed some more orange to it to really look the way I wanted it to. So that's cool. I'm doing a lot with that middle one, but because of the fact that it's blended, it doesn't attract as much attention. And I still haven't given it a lot of detail, so that's great. I feel like I'm doing some good work there. One other thing I wanted to mention was just to quantify some of the things you can do if you're trying to develop a new style. I told you that stepping away was really important for me, but I've been spending a year trying to change my style intentionally. And I wanted to list a couple things that I've done that you can do if you're looking to kind of like tweak the way your stuff looks. This is the painting that I'm most proud of that I've ever made. I think, despite the fact that it went quickly, it's far less detailed, far less difficult. I mean, I paint people's faces sometimes, and that's hard stuff. But yeah, I feel like my year of thinking about style is finally starting to bear fruit. And this specific painting is really the one that stands out for me personally. So if you're looking to develop a new style, here's some things that you can do. Create an inspiration board of artists that you love. Now this is ideally something that like you can look at all these artists at the same time. So just get a bunch of different printouts of paintings that you love and stick them all next to each other and try to think like, what is it that I like about these? Is it how all these artists use color? Is it, their brush strokes? What is it that I love about these? And then you can start breaking down, well, like, what can I do to channel these artists? And then what you can do is you've got this inspiration board of the spirit of art that you like, the feeling of the artists that you like. And then you can take small changes and during your own practice time, just try little things that sort of channel one of the artists that you like. You may see the way an artist uses saturated colors and say, for this painting, I'm going to try to channel that artist and play around with saturated colors. Then with your next painting, you can try something totally different with a different artist, whatever. But bouncing around like this is a fantastic way to find what resonates with you while you're painting. And that's inevitably going to create a style that is definitely you. If you pick one artist and you're just channeling them all the time, obviously people are going to see that one artist. But if you're doing this with all kinds of artists, different styles, you are slowly and naturally going to create something that is undeniably you. And then another thing that I'll mention, this is the last thing, is to play around with your process. So I told you this process for me is pretty different than what I've done in the past. For one, I'm mixing paint entirely differently. playing around with your own process is a good way to think and paint differently than what you're used to. So what that can look like is using different colors. It can be trying to mimic an artist's style that maybe you saw on YouTube, like the way that they paint, the way that they use their brush, the way that they draw before painting, whatever it is. Playing around with all of these different parts of a process is a good way to think differently. Now it looks like I'm doing the finishing touches on this painting, and I'm using the lightest light that I've used so far. And I'm picking key areas where I see the light shining to try to really put that final pop of contrast on there. So this is almost pure titanium white with, it looks like just a little bit of either yellow ochre or azo yellow. I think, pretty sure that's the mixture that I used, but almost entirely white. These finishing touches at the very end make a really big difference in your painting. It's kind of like the part of the painting where you put in part of the painting where you put in like reflections, things like that. This final touch of the lightest light, I like to save for the very end, kind of the finishing touch to add that final bit of vibrancy to your painting. So it looks like I'm finished with this painting now, and I'm probably gonna start scratching my name in. Yep, there we go. You'll probably see my big nose in a minute as I'm scratching it in. But I hope that this painting process video was beneficial for you. I really wanted to do another video where I just talked about what I'm thinking about as I paint and the specific things I'm doing differently now as I paint, because I really feel like I'm on the way to painting the way that I've wanted to paint for a really long time. It's pretty simple, but I'm finally getting to where I want to be. And maybe you can find some benefit from copying what seems beneficial from my own process as you're trying to figure out your style. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I really appreciate you all. Thank you so much for listening in with me. And I wish you the best of luck this month in your painting journey. Happy painting, everyone.